Okay, perfect. So again, welcome to the webinar, Best Kept Secrets of College Admissions. I know there's going to be people trickling in and they actually get into the waiting room before, so I have to let them in. So if I'm like clicking around, that's because I'm letting more people into the room. Okay, I am seeing some familiar faces, but other people I don't know. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about myself. I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Anya. I have been in higher ed for many, many years. I've started at Northeastern University in the admissions office. I worked a couple of years there. I spent many years in financial aid. My last position at Northeastern was an assistant dean for international students. So I was taking students from admission all the way to graduation, everything in between. I spent, 14 or 15 years there in all sorts of different capacities in enrollment management. So I've learned the behind the scenes. And then I moved into a smaller college, also in Massachusetts, and I was an assistant dean for international and graduate students. So that's where I learned kind of the whole path from the undergrad to the graduate degree and how it all ties in together. And that was a really great experience because it was a small school. I get to work with students really, really closely. And that's when I decided that I can do this on my own. And I founded College Starpoint, and right now I'm a principal consultant and a founder, and I do a couple of different things there. So part of it is the webinars. I try to do them monthly. Sometimes it's once every 2 months, but it's just general education for students and parents on the topics that are just the most hot topics that everybody seems to want to know about, and they try to look on the internet and they try to read the books, but there's just too much information out there, too much to sort through. So my goal here is to really just give you the nitty-gritty, the behind the scenes, that everything that you really want to learn or want to know in a compressed amount of time, and explain it in a way that's not written in a book, in a certain language, in the higher ed language that a lot of people don't understand. I think I speak in very simple terms and I try to deliver the message in the most understandable way. My core business though is I lead students from high school into college and through the admissions process. So some students come to me in 9th and 10th grade. The bulk of my students come to me in 11th grade, beginning of 11th grade, and we work with them through the application process in 11th grade over the summer and then into the 12th grade with everything that has to do. And I'm gonna talk about what that entails as we go through the webinar. And the last one, and again, similarly, I work with parents on the financial aid side of things. So the FAFSA and the CSS profile and all the financial documents that go along with the admissions process, I work with the parents on that side of things. And then the kind of the last part is just one-off consultations for students and for parents that have just really specific burning questions that they just need a specialist opinion on. And we talk about, it's just one-offs. I really appreciate when parents and students come to me time and time again, asking questions. And I see actually some of your names that are popping in here that I've seen in consultations before. So welcome, and I'm glad to see you again coming back for a webinar. So now let's get into the presentation. The agenda for today is, before we start talking about the secrets, I want to tell you about the admissions. And it's just very, very basic, just to give you an overview of what admissions entails and why it's so complicated and why a lot of students and parents seek out guidance. Then I will give you the 8 secrets that I think are the most valuable. There's a lot more, but I selected the 8 because they're the most dense. They're the most difficult to understand. So I hope I will deliver that to you and hopefully make things somewhat more clear. Then I'll give you my final advice, final suggestions. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the upcoming webinars and provide my contact information. And then we'll have time for your questions. So as I'm talking, if something that you're not either understanding or whatnot, just throw it in the chat so you don't forget, or write it down, and we'll have time at the end to address all the questions. All right, so let's start with just kind of like the general admissions, just an overview so you understand the magnitude of this business. And it really is a business, even though majority of the schools are nonprofit. A lot of them do operate like a business, and you will see why when I'm talking about some of the secrets of admissions. So in the US, there's over 4,000 colleges and universities. And the kind of the funny thing about this is people don't realize what that number actually represents, because most people know the top 50 or the top 100 schools, and they don't even know that there's another 3,900 colleges and universities exist. So how do you start looking at schools? How do you start making your selections when you don't even know what's out there? And the system is so decentralized, which means that schools can do whatever they want in their admissions process, in their enrollment process, sometimes in their institutional financial aid process. You know, the federal and state financial aid process, they're guided by rules and regulations. But how schools distribute their own money, their own funds, that is totally decentralized. There's no rules, there's no regulations. Same goes for admissions. Some schools really focus on this type of student, while other schools focus on the other type of student. And the application requirements, that just all varies school to school. But what you need to understand is that there's 2 kind of main sources of information when it comes to a college application. The first one is the hard quantitative data, which is the numbers. So this is what your academic records, this is your curriculum, this is your GPA, your SATs, your school rank or your student rank within the school. This is the data that's really difficult to manipulate. It's really difficult to change once it's there. So once your GPA is a 3.0 or 3.2, it's really hard to move it up. There's really nothing you can do almost in the senior year to change that. You're same with your SAT scores. Once you take them and this is what you get, this is pretty much you're stuck with that score. Now we'll talk about test optional schools and whether you should submit scores or not. But so this is the kind of the hard, fast data, which is the first gate of entrance into the university admissions process. Then you have the qualitative, the soft data. So this is the data that can be manipulated and massaged and messaged. And so this is your personal narrative, your characteristics. This is your essay and extracurricular activities and your resume and interview and how you present yourself and recommendation letters and all of the other things that are not set fast, numbers. And that is where guidance counselors and educational consultants, that's where they come in, and that's where we do most of the work, because this is the stuff that matters. It affects the application process, but nobody really explains how to do this well. And students really get confused about this whole process because there's just so much to do and so much to keep in mind. So a typical application packet, I have some of my, I have a couple of the students here. And so the juniors already know this, the rising seniors know this, but if you have a younger kid and you've never seen an application package, a lot of parents get surprised by how much stuff they really need to produce to apply to a college. So first you have your general application with all your demographic data. Then you have your supplement. So each school that you're gonna apply to, if you're applying through a common application, will have their own section where they ask their own questions. They may have their own essays, their own writing assignments, their own whatever it is for that school. And so the more schools you have, the more work that entails. Then obviously there's a fee. And then guidance counselor will provide high school transcript. They will send your school report or the profile. Your test scores is something that you would be responsible for. An essay that you're gonna write, for like one general essay that you're gonna write. And when I say you, I'm obviously talking to the student, not the parent. And again, there might be some additional essays that are required based on which schools you're applying to. And then we have letters of recommendation. We have the guidance counselor write a letter. We have 2 teachers write a letter. And if you're applying to some specific majors, there might be a portfolio or addition or something like that. A student might want to include additional documents, but kind of a rule of thumb is don't include stuff that's not asked for. It actually, when I was in the admissions office, the joke was the thicker packets represent the thickest students, which means that when a student is really concerned about their ability to get in, they will send everything. They will send a letter from their grandma. They will send some, musical recordings that they did in the 3rd grade, just very unnecessary stuff. And it just, it overwhelms an admissions officer. And the best practice here is only send what you need to send, the best version of that thing. So you might write an essay and rewrite it 10 times. That doesn't mean that you're gonna have to send 10 different essays. Send one, the best one, and make sure that it's the best representation of you. So that's just general information about the admissions process. As you can see, there's a lot. And each section of the application, each part of the process really is, it's convoluted, it's gray, it's nuanced. So, a lot of parents and students do have questions along the way. And I'm happy to help with that. So let's get into the first secret of the schools, which are the haves and the have-nots, and what is a brand name. I meet with a lot of students and parents that are very concerned about the prestige and the name of the school where they're applying to. And rightfully so. We have 4,000 universities in the States, and people know only like less than 10% of them. So in higher ed, we talk about these schools as sellers and buyers. The seller schools are the schools that you guys all know, that you can close your eyes and you can name probably 10, 15, 30 schools off the top of your head. These are all of your Ivies. This is your, MIT, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, all of the UCLAs, all those schools. We all know them. We see them on TV. They have, maybe amazing sports teams. Maybe they're just super, out there with research. Their professors are on TV. You hear their names. So these are the sellers. This is less than 10% of all colleges and universities. And these schools are overwhelmed with applications. And a lot of those applications come from some of the most qualified students. And admissions officers at those schools, they act like gatekeepers to the college and to the education. So they meticulously select their incoming freshman class. They throw the majority students in the deny pile, and the students that enter are actually, they handpicked them. And a lot of those schools don't provide merit scholarships or any kind of enticing aid packages and a lot of aids or discounts, because they don't have to, because there's plenty of schools that will, there's plenty of students and parents that will pay full price to attend those schools because of their perceived prestige. And then we have the buyers. So the buyers are the 90+% of all the colleges and universities in the States. They lack the brand name and the recognition. There might be really amazing schools that provide great education. The people just don't know about them. And their admissions officers are not gatekeepers, they're recruiters. They go out there and their job is to let people know about their college. They go to the fairs and they attend high schools and they do all this stuff just to make sure that people get to know them. And so they provide steep discounts. They have a ton of financial aid. They give merit scholarships because they need those students to survive. And so when we're talking about, all the schools and everything, all the colleges and universities in the States, you need to realize how many schools are there. And so, why does it matter? It actually matters a lot, because what people don't understand is that top 25 universities in the US actually are not at all interested in undergraduate education. They're more interested in the research and they're more interested in graduate education. And so students that are applying and thinking, their freshman year experience is going to be this amazing thing at this great university, a lot of them get disappointed because the focus is really not on them. It is on the research and everything else that comes after that undergraduate education. And so the other reason why it's important is because that perceived prestige and the rankings, they move a lot. And so one of the examples that I always like to give is Northeastern University, my personal alma mater. So when I was applying to schools, Northeastern was on my safety school list. And so just for full disclosure, I also applied to BC, Brandeis, Tufts, NYU, some other schools. Northeastern at the time was ranked 150th university, and I was applying as an international student. So I wasn't eligible for any financial aid. I wasn't eligible for any scholarships or any grants, but Northeastern was a major buyer at the time. They were recruiting students like crazy. They gave me a scholarship, and actually that's why I ended up going there. It was about the money. It was not about the prestige or whatever else, because Northeastern didn't have prestige. So fast forward 20 years, I've spent 15 years working there. So I know how quickly Northeastern rose up in the ranks. Right now, they're ranked 49th. Their admit rate is 18%, which is higher than BU. It's higher a lot of time than actually BC in most categories. So they're not, by higher I mean smaller. So they've become a super selective school. a research institution, an R1 research institution, and they rose 101 points in 20 years, which, yes, it's unheard of. And it's, one of those things that doesn't happen often, but rankings and prestige does move. So some of the students, so now looking at the student profile and looking at what kind of students get admitted, what kind of students get financial aid, I wouldn't be able to get in there. And that is just a full on, honest assessment of how far that school has gone. So that's why it matters. A lot of kids and parents choose a school thinking that, today it's ranked X, and for the rest of the time, it's going to be ranked the same. But it doesn't happen like that. It moves, it changes. There's an ebb and flow to higher education. There's some schools that fall off the radar that were ranked really, really high. And so what brings me to the next point is that prestige and rankings say very little about the quality of education. Just like I said, there's a ton of sellers that don't focus at all on undergraduate education. There's a ton of buyers that provide amazing student experience and amazing education. It's just that students don't know about them. And when I was at Northeastern, I was already working there. So I started getting some of the behind the scenes information of the, how faculty and staff get there and, how faculty works. Northeastern actually hires a ton of adjunct faculty that work in other schools. So what I learned recently actually is that a lot of the faculty that teach at Northeastern also teach at Harvard and MIT and BU and BC and all the other schools. And I've spoken to them and they told me that the way they teach is exactly the same. The curriculum is the same. The material is the same. There's nothing different. So what you get in the classroom at a lower ranked school might be the same as what you would get in an Ivy League. You just need to understand that the prestige and rankings have nothing to do with the college experience or the classroom experience. And schools don't want to talk about it because to them, the higher they are in the rankings, the more students they're going to get, later on. So what is important here to understand is that a student needs to have a balanced college list. I've seen way too many college lists that are super skewed into the super selective schools where, you have your Ivies and the near Ivies and all the brand name schools. And that leaves you not enough, the students are not hedging their bet because they're not, what if they don't get in anywhere? What happens after that? So you need to have a list that has the safety schools, that has the target schools, that has the reach schools, so that the mistake doesn't happen. If you only know of the best schools, and if that is your list, then I'm sorry, you're going to be screwed. And I say this multiple times a day to many students is your list is not good. We need to reconsider, think of some of those buyers, find them and put them on your list. All right. Second, the selection process and the holistic approach. So what is a holistic approach to admissions? If you are a junior or senior, or if you're a parent that has sat through some of these admissions info sessions, everyone says the same thing. We have a holistic approach to admissions. What does that actually mean? Can anybody actually explain what holistic means? No, they can't explain because there is no explanation. Holistic approach to admissions means they review and they do whatever they want. They review students and they rank them at whatever criteria they decide. And every school has their enrollment goals and every school has their way of doing things, and they're not about to disclose it. Why would they give up their secret? This is how they can say, you know, we review a whole student. We don't just look at the grades and the SAT scores. So then the follow-up question is, why can't you just look at the grades and the SAT scores? Like, what is keeping you away from that? Why do you have to look at the whole student? And I will give you an example of why this can't happen. So Harvard University in 2019 had 26,000 domestic students. So you can tag on another 10 to 15,000 international, but let's just focus on domestic students from the US, 26,000. Out of those, they had 8,200 with perfect 4.0 GPAs, unweighted, perfect 4.0 GPAs, okay? They had 3,500 students with perfect SAT scores. And Harvard in 2019 only had 1,700 spots for their students. So just think about that. 26,000 applicants, 8,200 perfect GPA, 3,500 perfect SATs, and only 1,700 spots. How can they possibly figure out how to fill that class if they're only looking at grades and SAT scores? It's impossible. And for the majority of the sellers, it's the same issue. They have too many great students applying to their schools, so they can't possibly say, we're going to reject you because your grades are not good enough, because they are perfect. How much better can you be? So they have to look at the whole student. That's where the holistic process comes. And just another point on Harvard. In 2020, they had 39,000 applicants, and they admitted a class of 2,100. 39,000, they admitted 2,100 students. So super selective schools and highly selective schools are actually driving this whole wagon of holistic approach. And smaller schools or less known schools, they have to jump on board because they need to say, we're also holistic. We also look at essays and you know, and everything else. It's not just the Harvards of the world that care about you as a person. So that's why this whole process is not very clear. It's very, very muddy of how you select a class when a lot of your students are so brilliant. And so at the end of the day, as you know, as it comes from me, who's worked in admissions office, and my friends who are in admissions office now, at the end of the day, every school wants a good kid. They want a kid that's gonna participate, that's gonna, you know, do good for the community, do good for the, you know, environment, for the college. They're gonna be involved, they're gonna be active, they're gonna be a good student, they're gonna be a good fit for the campus. Whether you're talking about an Ivy League campus or you're talking about a third-tier institution, every school wants a good kid. And so how do you show this? Is through all those other things that I talked about earlier in the presentation. You show this through the essays and through recommendations and through your extracurricular activities. You show that you can get involved and you are, you know, excitable and excited and you want to pursue all these things in college. And the mistake that a lot of parents and students make as they go through high school, so if you're early on in the high school process, don't make this mistake, is they want to be well-rounded. And the parents tell me, I'm gonna sign up my kid everywhere because I want them to be well-rounded. Well, admissions officers are not looking for a well-rounded kid. They're looking for a well-rounded class. And so what does that mean? It means that every student in the class is a piece of this larger puzzle. And each student brings their own thing to the class. And it's how they work together, how they shape the class. is what's important. So each student needs to be unique, and they need to have something special that they bring to the college. And they need to fit within the environment of the college, not just be well-rounded with 20 different activities and, you know, five things that they do well. They could do one or two things really well, and that could be their thing. That could be their differentiator that makes them unique. And that's really how the whole selection process and the holistic approach, that is what it's really based on, is how unique and different each student in the class that they're shaping is going to be. All right, let's move on. This is an interesting one. So demonstrated interest is really new, as of probably 5 to 7 years ago new. It's not new to admissions officers, it's new to the public. I think the students are just catching up on this trend, and they're just realizing how to play the system, but I'm going to tell you about this. So what is demonstrated interest and why it's important? Every school has a yield rate. A yield rate is a part of the admissions criteria or things that schools get judged on. And a yield rate in college is a percent of students who choose to attend the school after they get admitted. So you have, you know, every school realizes that they're not the only school where the kid is applying to. So they want to make sure that whoever they admit actually goes to them versus to their competition, so they can protect their yield rate. And so demonstrated interest is one of those things that helps the college kind of determine how really interested is the student in us. Are they applying just because they don't have any other options and, you know, it's the thing that like where most of their friends are applying? Or are they applying because they're really into our mission and into our goals and they really want to be involved? Again, they want that good kid, right? So they're trying to figure this out through the application process. And what happens was if you have two similar students and one student has, you know, gone to your website multiple times, they've visited your campus, they're following you on social media, they're doing all these things to show you they've reached out to the admissions office, they've shown you that they're really excited about your school. And then you have another student that just applied and that's it, there's no other record on them. They will select that first student for sure. You can actually research, every college needs to publish their common data set. And that's where it's somewhere in the weeds of the website. It's usually not very easy to find, but it's there. They have to publish it. And the common data set usually outlines what kinds of things are important to that college. And 1 out of 5 schools rate demonstrated interest as considerable importance. Now, this is the same ranking that counselor recommendations and essays get. And it's actually more important than teacher recommendations, than the class rank and the extracurricular activities. So just think about that. You showing the school that you want to go there is more important than all of your extracurricular activities in high school, which is what students spend so much time doing and, you know, perfecting and strategizing on. So that's, I think a lot of students don't understand really how important it is. And I talk to my students that I work with all the time, is that, you know, how do you show demonstrated interest? How is it measured? Through emails. Schools are going to be sending you emails, open each mail. They track that information. They track how long you're staying and reading the email. They're tracking what you're clicking and how many times you're visiting their website. They're tracking if you're following them on social media. So one of the things that I always tell my students is, if you have a social media account, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, go and follow those schools. Once a week, go and click like. like their pictures, make a couple of comments. It will take, a few seconds of your time in a day or in a week, but it will matter a lot in the admissions process. Every student has a virtual profile. By the time they apply, an admissions counselor can go in and see how often they're visiting their websites, all of their clicks, all of their social media, and everything like that. So it's important to understand that demonstrated interest is definitely one of those things you really need to pay attention to in the admissions process. And if there is a high school representative from a college or like an admissions counselor that comes to your high school, go and talk to them. That's why they're there for. That is the best, literally the best way to show demonstrated interest. Because what happens is those admissions counselors then go back, they will write the names of all the students that they met, they will put in your digital file, and you're gonna have a huge green check mark next to your name when it comes to demonstrated interest. All right, as you probably know, maybe some of you don't know, but as you know, there's 3 ways to apply into college. And I'm not gonna focus on them, I'm just gonna focus on one. So there's the early decision, early action, and regular decision. Early action and regular decision, I'm not gonna talk about. The only difference is the deadlines for early action are sooner, and you get to know your decision sooner. And then regular decision is usually sometime in January. Early action is usually November deadlines. Early decision actually is very, very different. And this is what I want to talk to you about, because I think a lot of students perceive it as like a huge benefit in the admissions process. And in actuality, it usually is not, because it really primarily benefits the college, which I think is one of those things that is kind of a secret that schools really don't want you to know. So how does it benefit the college? Well, what is an early decision? Early decision is a binding decision where the student who's applying has to basically sign a contract saying, if I get admitted to the school, I will go there no matter what. So no matter what financial aid they give me, no matter what other schools I get into, no matter what the circumstances are, I'm going because I'm already committed before even knowing the decision. And so what happens is, if they do get admitted, they actually have to notify all the other schools where they've applied to that they got in early decision at an X school, and they're withdrawing their application everywhere else. They can't negotiate financial aid. They can't do any type of comparison analysis. They're already committed to that school. So why does this benefit the school primarily? Is because it hedges their enrollment numbers and goals. Because one early decision student normally equals four regular decision admits. The reason why is, in regular decision pool, they will admit 4, maybe 1 student will go there. This is like an average yield rate, right? So 1 in 4 will end up going. Here you admit 1 and 1 will come. So you can be super, super specific on who you're picking. You can be, you can do whatever you want in the early decision round, because it protects you. It protects your yield rate. You're not really worrying about whether the kid is going to end up going or not. So it saves the school a ton of money. They actually don't need to give you any extra financial aid or any help at all, for that matter, because they don't have to. You already told them you're coming no matter what the situation is. And yes, usually their admit rates are much higher in early decision rounds. So, but the reason why is because not a lot of students apply early decision. And they can also, the more students they get in the early round, the more, kind of the safer they feel moving on, further on in the regular decision round. So I will give you an example so that you understand kind of the scope really of what it means. So Vanderbilt University in 2018, they filled 53% of their incoming freshman class through early decision. 53%. In the regular decision round, so this is in November, in regular decision round, which is in January, they had 30,000 applicants and only 750 spots. 30,000 applicants for 750 spots. So you can now understand why for a school, this is such a win-win situation. They get the best, most excited, committed students in November. And then in January, they can be like, we will pick the cream of the crop, the best, only and nobody can argue with that. It's a holistic process. So there's a ton of negative consequences for the students, again, which schools don't want to talk about. They can't see other acceptances. They can't compare financial aid awards. They can't negotiate their aid. They can't now go back to the school that applied early decision, say, I can actually afford it because you didn't give me any aid. Well, you signed the contract. You told us you were coming. It's not, this contract is not, they can't sue you for it, but it would look really, really bad if you actually don't end up going there. The only reason how a family can wiggle out of it is for financial decisions. But let me tell you, it's very difficult and it's a complicated process, and I don't recommend it. So I always tell my students, early action, yes, by all means, do it. It's non-binding. You get, submit everything early, get your decision early, and be done with it. Early decision, no, unless you absolutely must, unless your parents completely don't care about finances and how much to pay. And this is a school that is end all and be all, or is so specific to what you're looking for that there's not another school that could even compare. That is the only way where I would say, okay, fine, apply early decision. But so far, I really haven't had those circumstances yet. All right, so I have 8. So I know that we are at 8:57, and we have 3 more of the content slides and then Q&A. So as I told you, I'm gonna run over. If you have to hop off, totally fine, I understand. But I really hope you stick with it because there's a lot more good information coming your way. So test optional. You probably have heard about this. A lot of schools decided that the SAT and ACT scores or standardized testing scores are not required. And more and more schools are kind of jumping on board. So how it all started and why, this conversation is actually not new. This conversation started many years ago when research studies showed that standardized testing are not fair to students who come from underprivileged backgrounds. So you have a student that goes to the top high school with parents having a ton of resources to pay for the best tutors, for the best, classes, SAT prep, all the stuff. And you're comparing them to a student that may have, has parents that are either underemployed or unemployed. And so the student needs to work and they don't have time, money, or resources to get additional SAT or ACT, standardized testing help. You have the same student who maybe goes to an inner city school where their, just general English and math education is not as good. And so you have to compare those students side by side, not really taking into account all the other things that are going on in the background. And so many people in higher ed decided, started talking about how this is unfair and it's not equitable. And you can't compare students who have all the resources in the world to get prepped for this to students that have nothing, and you're basically judging them the same. So this started, and then COVID happened, and a lot of the test centers closed, and so many students were just unable to take the tests in 2020, and that continued in 2021. There were different restrictions, and so the schools on the last admission cycle, most of the schools said, we've been talking about it for years, let's just pull the trigger, let's make tests optional. So students had an option whether to send their scores or not. So students that were actually able to take the test, at that point, they could decide whether to take the test or not. So that happened, and a lot of people in higher ed were very excited that this was a step forward, and we could now start to evaluate students on other things, like look more into their curriculum and the strength of their classes and things like that. But what actually happened in 2021, so we got all of the admissions decisions this year from last admission cycle this spring. And what happened was actually not good. What we saw is that majority of the schools were actually accepting students with test scores at double the rate than the students who didn't submit their test scores. So once again, that wasn't fair and it wasn't equitable. And a lot of schools got put on notice. So there's a couple of things that could have happened. One explanation to that is students who generally wouldn't be able to get into some of those higher profile schools started applying to those schools because they felt like, oh, well, I don't have to submit my really bad SAT score, so maybe they can just accept me. So that was part of the reason. But the other big part of the reason is the schools didn't realize how difficult it is to change the process of admission. The whole evaluation process and how admissions officers work has been set for decades. And when you pull one part out of the process, the rest of the process really shakes and crumbles. And it's really difficult to then figure out how to stabilize it. So they just turned into the most natural thing that they could do is like, oh, like, let's evaluate the kids with the test scores first, figure that out, and then we'll worry about everybody else. So the consequences of this is that a lot of schools got put on notice and they were called out for it, and it wasn't okay. And so the hope is that most schools, the majority of the schools, took at least this summer to figure out how their admissions process is going to work from here on out, because what happened last year was not okay. How do we move forward? Like, is that actually going to happen? No one knows. Again, every year we're going to get closer and closer unless we go back to mandatory testing. But if it stays optional, I think every year it's going to become more and more fair. And so the students will learn, and admissions counselors and educational consultants will learn more of how this process works if we take the SATs out. But for now, my prediction is for the next 3 or 5 years, we need to assume that standardized testing is still not optional. So when students come to me and ask me to send or not to send, oh, it's optional, should I just not send? I say, if you have good SATs, first of all, you need to study and you need to assume and you need to approach this as if they're not optional. They're not optional. I would say assume they're mandatory, study, be serious about it, and do the best that you can. And if you have a really bad score for some reason, I mean, if you study and it just doesn't work out, then yes, at that point, let's talk about maybe not sending them. But you shouldn't go into this process thinking it's going to be a breeze because I don't have to study for the SATs and nobody's going to ask me and it's optional and whatnot. So what I say, and this goes back to the having a balanced list, is worry less about your score and worry more about the range where you fall into that school. You want to be at a higher echelon, you need to be at a higher percentage than their average student, or at least be the average. But if you see that your scores are way below average, then maybe this is not the school for you. Maybe you're just looking at the sellers and you don't have enough buyers on the list if your scores are not good enough consistently for all the schools that you're looking at. So some of the tips of how to do well is, take the tests early and often. Take it at least 3 times. The studies show that the more times you take the test, the better you tend to do. It's just because you're used to the environment, you're used to the type of questions, you train your body like an athlete to take this test, and you learn each time. And so each time the score usually improves. And then the more times you take the test, actually, the more chances you give yourself to give yourself a super score. So a super score is where a school takes the best of your English. So if you were talking math, right? Where they take the best of your English and the best of your math. It could be different tests, and they combine it and they create one super score. So obviously, the more tests that you take, you increase those chances. And 8 out of 10 schools do this. So there's really no reason why you shouldn't at least try to kind of follow that path. All right. Comparing the schools. One of the questions that comes up over and over again in the webinars, in my one-on-one consultations, is how do they compare kids from different schools? So how can they compare kids from an inner city public school to a kid from a private school if you're saying that, the SAT scores are not equitable and there's all this stuff that goes on in the background in the student's life? Well, the answer is that they don't. So, and some of you that have seen my webinars before, I've talked about this, is that private school kids get compared to other private school kids. Inner city public school kids get compared to those same students. So does that mean a private school is better than public or public is better than private? No, it doesn't mean that at all. A student is evaluated based on the opportunities and the options that they had at the school. So if you have a private school that offers a ton of SAT or a ton of AP classes, and they offer a ton of extracurricular activities and sports and this and that and clubs and the student hasn't done any of it, that's going to look really bad, because compared to other private school kids, other kids in his class or her class, they're going to not look that great. And if you have a student from a school that doesn't, maybe offers 1 or 2 AP classes versus 20, and they only have, 5 clubs and not 50, but they've taken those 2 AP classes and they participate in 3 out of 5 clubs, they're going to look really good on the application, because compared to some of the other students from their high school, they're obviously going to shine. So they're not going to be compared to the private school kids. And the way that the colleges actually look at the quality of the high school is by the percentage of students who attend that college. So the more students from that school that attend the college, the more of a chances they can give to maybe not as a qualified candidate, because they believe that, okay, other classmates came here, they did well, other kids from the school are, doing XYZ and they're great members of the community, we're going to give them a chance. So this is where Naviance is actually a really great platform some of the high schools might be using, where I don't know if your high school is using Naviance, but for high schools that are, they actually say like, how many students from our high school went to this college and what are your chances of getting in and succeeding there. So the best way, I guess, to figure this out is to meet with the visiting admissions officer. And I said this already multiple times, but I can't stress this enough. Students and parents think that, oh, it's just some random person that shows up and, they're just doing their job. But no, at the end of the day, those admissions counselors are probably going to be people that are reading applications from that high school. So it's important to get to know them. And it's important for them to get to know your name, because they'll see your name, they'll be more open to giving you a chance, even if you don't check off all the boxes. And so going back to comparing schools, the idea here is that it's better to be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond. So then parents call me and they say, should we put our kid into a private school? We have this opportunity, or should we keep them in a school where they're at? I always tell them, you need to look at you need to look at their competition of who, like, what are they gonna do when they're there? So if you're attending an elite private school or elite high school and you're not a superstar student, you are not going to shine that bright. And so your college list needs to look appropriate. Whereas if you're attending an average high school, but you're brilliant and you are, shining in every class and you're taking all the opportunities that the high school has to offer, that's going to look a lot better on a college application. And so understanding the nuances of your competition, looking around at your classmates and seeing what are they doing, how many AP classes are they taking, what clubs and activities they're doing, and how are they doing it, and what leadership experiences they're bringing and showing to admissions counselors. That really what matters more than worrying about some other kid at some other high school that might be doing something. And that's why, again, I don't ever recommend students comparing themselves to their friends that might be going to other schools, or to their cousin, or to their mother's, brother's sibling, and their whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is who is in your class and what are they doing. Worry about those kids, because that's your first round of competition. Okay, high school curriculum. So back to the whole idea of, big fish, small pond. Admissions counselors love finding diamond in the rough. They love finding those brilliant students that are just, coming from either like underprivileged backgrounds or not like well-known high schools or not elite high schools, and they're really shining. They're shining among their classmates and their friends, and they really stand out. So I always say, when looking at a high school curriculum, at a transcript, an admissions officer wants to see, would rather see a tough curriculum and mediocre grades than an easy curriculum and all A's. So because it shows character, it shows grit, it shows something that is innate to the student, that they're not afraid to take risks and take really hard classes. So when I am looking at, strategizing moving forward, so like I have a kid in 10th grade and we're talking about what classes they should take, I always talk about academic rigor and showing that you're not afraid to take risk. You're not afraid to take those really hard classes. And yes, maybe get a B, but show them that you did it and you succeeded in the best way that you can. And to show progression really is the key here. So if you're starting in a standard class, maybe move to an honors class next year, maybe move to an AP the year after, but show some kind of a progress, that you're not just stagnated. You're taking, standard Spanish and you're taking standard Spanish all 4 years. Why? If you had an A in standard Spanish, why not try to take honors next year? If it's allowed, if this is what, if your teacher is recommending, if you stay with the same level and you're not showing progression and you're not showing rigor, it doesn't come across well. It comes across as the student took the easy way out. They're not the diamond in the rough that we're looking for. And a lot of times what parents and students confuse is the merit versus the achievement. And so the merit here is showing your ability to do well through a prolonged period of time, or showing that you are able to sustain that level of intensity in your high school curriculum through multiple years, versus achievement where you do really well in the tests. So if we're thinking about like GPA versus SAT score, the reason why GPA is more important than an SAT score is because GPA shows merit. It's a long-term success versus achievement. You got a 1600 on an SAT, good for you. You probably studied a lot for the past 2 months, or you had a really good tutor, or you're just really good at taking tests. Yes, of course, having a perfect, SAT score is wonderful and it's super admirable, but you need to understand why it's an achievement and not merit. Merit shows through your academic rigor and through sustained kind of difficulty of your high school curriculum. All right, and the last one is the essays. How important are they? And how much time should students spend writing them? They're important. I would say, on a scale of importance, there are things that are way more important than an essay. But to say that don't worry about an essay, it doesn't mean anything, I would be lying. I will be honest with you, and one of the secrets is that admissions officers, they don't read the essays, they skim them. An average time it takes an admissions officer to go through an application is 8 minutes. A lot of times it's much faster than that. A lot of times it's 3 to 4 minutes. So, I mean, how long do you think they're gonna spend looking at an essay of 650 words? They're literally skimming, they're looking at keywords, they're making sure your grammar is there, that you can write, that you're writing an interesting story. They're not really gonna, sit and analyze why you put this word and not that word, why you chose this topic and not that topic. It's all of that becomes not as important. Some of the key things to keep in mind is avoid the 3 Ds. So the Ds are the disease, death, and disorder. And most students, for some reason, are just really drawn to those things to write about. And I will tell you, as an admissions officer, when I read the applications, yes, it's sad. And yes, you understand that certain disorder or certain disease had a profound effect in the student's life. But after a while, you become so immune to these essays that you're just kind of like, okay, next, okay, next. And what you stop and read are actually like an essay about, I don't know, learning how to cook a French meal in your home kitchen where you had, half a stove that was working, or, doing something that is, super strange, or, writing about a hobby that a lot of people don't have, and a lot of students write about the same things. Again, death of a family member, some disease that they've had, sports, injuries, and last minute saves of the game. And the time was running out, and we had 2 seconds left, and I made the winning shot, and then we won the competition. Great. I've read like thousands of those. It's great. It's not that interesting. So again, going back to the uniqueness of your character and uniqueness of your application, that's where you show it in the essay. And I think a lot of what students are missing and are not really getting is that really at the end of the day, an admissions counselor, when they're reading or skimming your essay, they just want to get to know you better. They want to get to know you as a person. They want you to be authentic, and they want you to be vulnerable, and they don't really care for like the wow factors. I've traveled, I visited 30 countries in 2 years. Like, okay, great for you. And what? Like, what's next? They want to know about your life, like your personal feelings, and something that's super vulnerable and authentic. And that really is what matters. And that those are the personality and the traits that they're really looking for. We got through the best. So I am way over time. I apologize, but this is the last content slide. So just to summarize, if you're a parent listening to this, understand that the student will be driving this whole process. And a college counselor or educational consultant, or you're the parent, you can help guide them or advise them, or you can give them suggestions. But at the end of the day, the student should take control of the process, and they should understand the nuances. And this is how I work a lot with my students, is that I don't tell them what to do. I will explain them, just like in this webinar. I will explain them the pros and cons. I will give them the best practices. I will tell them the tips and tricks. But at the end of the day, if I'm telling them to go right and they are holding the wheel and they're turning left, they're going to go left. And there's not, you as a parent or me as an advisor or their guidance counselor, they will not be able to do anything. So the more education you bring to the student, the more hopefully the right decisions they're going to be able to make. Based on some of the things that I told you, I hope you now realize that merit is more important than achievement. So GPA and high school curriculum is more important than your SAT scores. So take the hardest classes that are available, try to do the best that you can, spend time working on your classes versus studying for the SAT. I always tell my students, it should take you 3 or 4 months to study for a standardized test. And it's going to take you 4 years to study for your classes. So concentrate on what really matters, like what's going to take the most time. Expand the college list beyond the super selective. I really hope I got that point through in the first couple of slides, where I hope you really now understand why there's so many students that just get baffled by this whole, like, I can't believe, I didn't get in anywhere, or I applied to 20 schools and I got into one. It's because your list wasn't balanced. Like you were not applying to the right schools. That's why. Avoid early decision. Design your admissions application to make it shine. Again, this is one of those things where an admissions counselor or coach can really help you to kind of shape that. Don't forget about the demonstrated interest is the easiest way to get points on your application. And lean file is the best file. Don't send extra stuff. Don't do extra work. Send the best of what you have. So that's it. That's it for my content. Some of the upcoming webinars are, I'm gonna do on September 8th, I'll do a webinar on loans and student loans and what are you borrowing, how are you borrowing, all of the financial stuff. On September 29th, I'll do a FAFSA workshop, and all you need to know about financial aid and the application process, kind of all the documents that you're going to need to submit and things to think about, merit aid and need-based aid and all of that. And at the end of October, I'll do a similar presentation about best kept secrets of financial aid and how to maximize the child's funding eligibility. And then in January, it's going to be just college admissions and financial aid 101, just like a combined session. So these are the 4 that are coming up. I really hope that you guys found this useful. And this is my contact information. So if you want to schedule a consultation, we'll be happy to talk to you. Find me on Instagram and Facebook under College Starpoint, and email me collegestarpoint@gmail.com, and visit my website. I'm really happy you're here, and I hope this was really helpful. I will be taking questions now. So I will stop sharing my screen so I could see you all. You guys can feel free to now unmute yourselves if you have questions, but I have a chat. Oh, thank you. Great educational webinar. Thank you. You're welcome. Do we have any questions? I know, again, we're way late, so you probably guys are falling asleep. So I'll wait for some questions. It was all so understandable. No questions? All right, I'll stop recording.